You can guess.
And that's a recost too. Furious Chic was you guys made Furious Chic. We just added a bunch of stuff to it.
and made it not an
Oh
attachment.
yeah, it like wasn't close to good enough.
I'll throw that in the possible title list for my memoirs.
That wasn't possibly good enough.
A Star Wars story.
Let's go. Hello, everyone. My name is Jake Petersen, and I'm here today with some very special guests. Welcome to IA Command, Paul Winchester and Todd Michlitsch, two people who worked on the development of Imperial Assault back when it was, still an official corporate thing and not the IACP. Paul and Todd, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Paul.
Hi, Paul. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was hoping Todd would do like a hi, I'm Paul, hi, I'm Todd, and then I wouldn't look like
hello there,
and it would look like we were doing. But
Well, that ship has sailed.
yeah, hi, I'm Paul. I started with Imperial Assault mostly from the beginning. I kind of came on at the last quarter or so of the original development, and basically then from then on was either I was involved in some way on every project since then, was either lead producer or designer or both on pretty much everything up through Tyrants of Lothal. So
What's the difference between a producer and a designer in this context?
Where your name gets written on the rulebook credit page. I don't know. The producer has to deal with budgets. I don't know. Todd, have people figured out what a producer does yet?
No, it's extremely flexible. High level, there's 3 designations at old FFG: designer, developer, producer. Designer is what you would think of as like the core engine designer, like what you would think of as a game designer probably. Developer is a content designer, so someone who takes a system that's already been developed and creates a bunch of stuff. That's what we did. So we were responsible for the entirety of expansions, but we were not involved in the creation of the engine. And then a producer is your kind of, you can think of them as like a back office job, where they are handling the budgets, they're coordinating with production, they're making sure that the schedule is being hit.
Coordinating the different teams, art, design, story.
Yeah, they're the person responsible for treating the game as a product.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just want a background. What expansion did you each start on?
Well, I started at the beginning.
Yeah, I joined in. Bestman Gambit was my first box.
But you interned during Hoth.
Oh, that's right. Internships count. Yeah, I was around.
Oh no, you weren't just you. We went home and got drunk after playing the Hoth finale and ruining it with all sorts of horrible stuff from the core set. So.
Oh, I forgot that was while I was an intern.
Yeah.
I still have nightmares of HKs.
It was awful. It was just terrible.
Yeah, I thought I saw a story about you guys where Todd, you were an intern, but then Paul, you got him onto the credits.
Did I? Sounds like something I would do.
I thought I read that somewhere, but
I mean, if he's on the credits of Hoth, then that's what happened.
Okay. Trust but verify.
I'm gonna say I have all my rule books stacked right by my desk here, so I could track that down while Todd tells us a little bit more about himself and his experience.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Todd. I was also a developer on Imperial Assault, starting debatably with Hoth, I suppose. The first project that I kind of got ownership over was Bestman Gambit, which rolled into Jabba's Realm, which will be the answer to one of your questions here in a second. From there, I was with the project for quite a while, through essentially the wrap-up. Although towards the tail end, I was also designing the app implementation of the co-op campaign. Worked on a few minis games. I was working on Rune Wars very briefly, a little bit on Legion. And then I hopped back. Since then I was briefly a manager at Z-Man Games, so working with the Pandemic line. and now I'm working on some solo projects that I will be able to share soon.
Sweet.
I'm glad to
Very
be able to
exciting.
confirm that Todd Michlitsch is credited as additional design and development. So he got second credit. Expansion design, Paul Winchester. Additional design and development, Sam Bailey, Justin Campaign, Stephen Kimball, Todd Michlitsch, and John Ying.
Nice.
So yeah, we have some. So we have a whole group of Imperial Assault designers here. Some more official than others.
Huh.
That's doing us a lot of credit here, Jake.
So
Well, depending on how long we keep this going, we've got some experience under our belts, but it'd be very good to speak to everybody. So I think that's a good way to launch us into our first question, which is, the community definitely noticed a shift in power level when Jabba's Realm came out and all the expansions after that. So, can you guys tell us what prompted that and what kind of went into that process?
I mean, Todd, you might have a different recollection of this than I do, but I don't actually think of Jabba's Realm as a change in power level. I think it is much more a realization of where the real power level was and where a lot of units had failed to be up till that point, but not all. And from that point on, we had a much greater understanding of where the real strengths and balances lie. And then it just became much more consistently designed at that level. So there were fewer dead cards from a competitive standpoint. And so it had the perception of everything was better when that was not entirely true. Goodness knows, I mean, like, nothing we put out in Jabba's Realm was more powerful than what C-3PO could do for his point cost, right? But that was like specialized and a unique situation. And you know, there are a handful of other cards that were approaching that level. Certainly, also Imperial officers and royal guards pre-adjustment. And so it was. I'm sure it was an increase compared to most cards, but a leveling off more so than any official creep. It was just an acknowledgement that, okay, this is the correct level for the game. We recognize that will make a lot of cards suck, but they sucked anyway. So it's now just official because there's enough content.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Paul glossed over very briefly there is that was about the time frame where we had started getting significant feedback from organized play.
Oh, yeah.
So up to that point, it was just kind of like, just Wild West of like this sort of works in campaign, it sort of works in testing, it's probably fine, right? And then we go and we see the first Worlds, and we see that finals match of like 8 Royal Guards versus 8 Royal Guards, and all they do is step forward, step back, and do-si-do their way to just like the most boring match you could possibly watch. And we're like, okay, all right, there's an extreme power disparity baked into this system. What do we need to do to be able to actually provide list building options, right? And the unfortunate reality of design is power creep is partially mistake and partially correction.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I want you to play with something, it has to be at least as good as the thing that you would play with otherwise.
Yeah.
Exactly. And finding, I guess we can say now is it's very hard to put something exactly at that power level and not over and still have it get played. So,
right.
Was there an intentional desire to increase the offense in the game? Because we saw a lot of that with like the hunter cards that were put in that expansion.
So yes and no. I'd be lying if I said there was not pressure to make the game move quickly because of the constraints of organized play.
Yeah.
We had seen a lot of really good matches go to time and end in really goofy ways. And you know, you could and we did argue that, hey, maybe rounds need to be longer. But then you compare that against the equally valid concerns of the people actually running organized play and how you run events and what that means for, like, there's just a lot of reasons that they can argue, like, hey, no, games shouldn't be 3 hours for a skirmish 1v1.
right. And when and I can tell, and I know in Worlds 2016, playing from 10 a.m. and I think we got out of the top 16 matches at 9 or 10 p.m. That was brutal. I just went home and crashed, and everybody else did too.
Was that the first Worlds? I have no sense of time.
2016 was the second Worlds.
Second Worlds, much better. Good.
Yes, yeah, that one. That one was much more fun to play in. Of course, I actually brought a good list that time. The first Worlds, anybody who wasn't running 4x4 or Rebel Blast, it was just kind of a Wild West out there. I had a friend who did pretty well with Boba. I was in there with Kane Somos.
Oh God, how?
Well, I mean, when you put a near unkillable unit in that time up in somebody's face and say, "Hey, I'm taking the objectives. What are you gonna do about it?"
Yes.
It works out sometimes. He went 3 and 4, but still, that's better than I expected from Boba.
Yeah.
So I have,
Yeah, I don't think I'd be revealing anything to say. Prior to Worlds, we had our concerns about what was coming, but we were told, look, we published stuff, we don't want to get invasive with Errata, it's not a video game, we can't just go patch stuff, and then the day after Worlds, we got called into the office and said, do whatever you have to do.
I remember.
I never want to see that again.
I remember watching that match with that person, and we had that conversation in real time. So yeah, it wasn't a surprise, but at the same time, from a risk perspective, it's really hard to prove ahead of time.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm not even
digital.
saying that person was that the decision was wrong.
No. Just for context, right? Like, there's a process to everything,
Yeah.
which will be part of every answer today, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on the whole Jabba's Realm thing then, we did see in Hoth that there was a bit of a start to mitigating the entire dodge thing with the HKs being able to reroll defense dice.
Yeah.
And then Jabba's Realm comes out and really takes that to the next level. Was that the next step in what was attempted to be done in Hoth, or was that just
I am certain that is a direct consequence of the finale playthrough that Todd and I had a Hoth that I alluded to earlier, where we went home and got very drunk.
Are you allowed to say what happened in that game? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just we were playing the finale of Hoth, which if you've played any finale of any campaign, they're a slog and really long and they need to be big and epic, which means they're terrible. They're just way too long.
I will come in and say that when I played the Hoth campaign, I thought it was really cool to have it start on the Star Destroyer and then build in the outdoor map. I thought that was really cool.
that was really good.
Thank you. Well, anyway, we were playing an earlier version of that map, and we had the HKs that pop up at the end as one of the last surprises, the elite HKs, and we were just playing with technological superiority. This is another thing we learned: is just never use anything from the core set ever. It's wrong, right? So that was part of the lessons we learned. And this is before we started testing with decks. That was another thing that came directly out of this playtest, was testing with decks instead of with dice. So I had cloaking devices from technological superiority on HK assassin droids, and on a really essential huge kill shot, they just rolled a dodge and basically ruined the entire 3.5 hour finale. And so we got, really frustrated and also had to think about, okay, that was awful. That was just the worst thing that ever happened. But we're sitting there testing the mission, right? And so we're in the mindset to think, okay, what's wrong with the mission? Mm-hmm. But we had to go back and be like, wait, nothing. The core set is bad, and white dice and dice games in general are bad, right? And so we know these two things, and so we need to stop testing them. And I'm being glib, right? Dice games are super fun. They had all sorts of hurrah story stuff, and the core set is all over the place, right? Tech superiority is actually way under where the power level is. It just has this one thing where it can add white dice and ruin everybody's day. And subversive tactics is the stupidest game-killing, overpowering thing that you should just pretend. That and Gideon should just essentially be removed from the entire game if you want it to be fun. But you're figuring out what to do. How could you possibly know that when you're making it the first time? We really didn't figure out what we were doing until Jabba's Realm, which is why there's that perceived power creep. And so the main thing we learned is that dodging is a real problem, and it's a problem that is baked into the game, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we came up with more ways to get rid of it, and we came up with and we, for our own internal testing, we started testing with decks instead of dice, so that we had an even distribution of dice faces throughout a playtest, so that we knew we were testing what we were actually testing, instead of the fact that dice can suck sometimes, which is what we would wind up testing over and over again if we didn't.
Yep.
That's actually
a
been
really good
okay.
example of the difference between testing for balance and testing for experience.
Yeah.
Right, like what's my intended experience for my user versus is it balanced, right? And figuring out which of those questions you need to answer at which time is a challenge.
I have, and that's actually been a really interesting challenge even for IACP, is giving players ways to mitigate dodges, more ways, without crippling the white dice as a result, because that's the other end of that spectrum, right? Is you make white dice useless, and we try to avoid that. I had a follow-up question, just one more about Jabba's Realm that I think will be important for ICP going forward. Paul, you mentioned that you were kind of bringing the power level up to the standards of the original game with Jabba's Realm. I was curious what figures in the early waves you would consider to be like a baseline for that, and then what figures after Jabba's Realm would you say would be like a baseline power level for Skirmish? And Todd, you can answer too, of course.
I feel like there's two ways you can answer that question, right? There's what should have been a baseline and what was the baseline. Which, it ties back into my previous statement about, are we looking at what do we wish the game had been, or are we looking at what is the game? I mean, our shortlist was always, unsurprisingly, Royal Guards, Rebel Saboteurs, and then you just have to be aware that C-3PO exists, Gideon exists, and Imperial officers exist. And so for a long time, that was the meta of, like, if a unit is going to be played, it has to be this good.
Yeah, I think it was, and again, and also this might have been less so in Skirmish. It probably was, but I think we looked at elite stormtroopers as a very workable baseline.
Yeah, I think that was our benchmark of like what we wish the game was.
Yeah,
and tried to match, but we were aware that they weren't getting super played in meta, so you have to put a hat on them. But
and it's just, I mean, that's if you watch the progression of the game, the number of Skirmish only, campaign only cards just continues to expand and expand, because the idea that it's the same game is just a lie for marketing, right? It's just a completely different game, and there are a couple times when you have a happy overlap, and it's luck. They're different games.
That makes sense. As just one final follow-up on the whole kind of power level thing then. Of all of the worlds that we've seen, that would be 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Which would you say was your favorite in terms of the meta? So in 2015 we had the 4x4 spam. 2016 we had of course. 2016 we had troopers. So in the finals we had Daniel Taylor with the stormtroopers, and then Desmond Miller with the rebel troopers, which was an interesting one. Then we had Jabba's Realm.
Was that when heavy troopers were getting mixed in a little bit?
Yeah, so that was heavy troopers with the spy upgrade, 2 sets of stormtroopers, and I think they had Blaze in it, which was pretty fun. He's one of my favorite figures.
He was one of the first villains we did correctly, the first unique figures we did correctly.
Yes, and I'd watched that match on YouTube. It's a really good match, but yeah, go on. Yeah, 17 was the Jabba's Realm.
Exactly, and then in 18 we had that would have been Heart of the Empire.
Yes.
Where the finals being an IG replay list going up against Han Ranger's list. And then finally 2019 Spectre Bowl. Do you have a favorite of any of those metas that came out ultimately?
I mean, I didn't watch a lot of those, but from the sounds of it, IG versus Han sounds the most like what people would have wished the game was when they designed it.
Yeah, I seem to recall that wasn't necessarily the destined finals match, and that it took a little bit of luck to not get a mirror match.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
it was nice to see that there was competition in that meta, because you're right. I mean, post Jabba, it did skew Scum real hard.
I think it was 15 of 16 of the top 16 were scumless, and then there was
Really?
one
Wow.
Luke one Han Rangers list that made it in, or not Han Rangers. It would have been Luke Rangers at the time.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
2017.
2017.
Yeah, 2017. Yeah, so that's then comparing that to 2018, which had a pretty decent mix. The Empire was out of the mix, but they had a couple representation.
Yeah.
No, the great tragedy of Imperial Assault, really, it goes back to the core design and the core misunderstanding, and not the core design, the core content design, and the misunderstanding of the core design in that content design that started with, like, hey, these are really important characters, they should probably be expensive and powerful, and people not having a sense of what that really meant to be that powerful as a single figure compared to just what 6 points worth of stormtroopers can do to somebody with 3 attacks
Mm-hmm.
Not
in
to
3
mention
different places.
objectives.
Yeah, not to mention objectives, right? And not to mention just bodies that have to get cleared in campaign mode, right? And so there was this fundamental disconnect that lasted really until Bespin Gambit about how much stuff could cost. Hoth got a little better. Leia was pretty close, maybe 1 point off instead of like 6, like everyone was in the core set. Well, and again, the core set, it's not just points, right? The stuff in the core set, it's not just off in points. It's like it's not doing enough. The way it's designed as a single figure isn't actually how single figures should work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go and look at like what our eventual high cost figures could do, like Jedi Luke, who just gets to do like basically a whole free activation before he takes his activation, right? That's what has to exist to make him worth something. But because it was all costed that way, it will never ever get used competitively. All this stuff that is fundamental to Star Wars like wouldn't get seen. We were able to fix some of it, but then it's worse in campaign because you'll use it and then get trounced for doing so. Right? There's nothing to stop you from using it, and then you just get hammered by for making that choice. And so that's my biggest sadness about the game, is that it's just, if you're playing it in a way that approaches fun, you better not be using those.
Yeah, so to come full circle there, I think as designers, it was really nice to see IG versus Han, right?
Exactly.
When you're working
Right.
on a licensed game,
Thank you.
with an IP as strong as Star Wars, that comes with expectations, right? And I think that finals fulfilled those expectations the best.
Yeah.
With that said, as a player and a tactics lover, trooper games are fascinating.
Yes.
Agreed.
Like, watching what someone like Daniel Taylor can do and just expose how different standing one space to the left is from the correct move is eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. If this was if it didn't have Star Wars on, if it was just like Android Netrunner trooper battles,
Correct.
then it would be on point. But I see exactly what you're saying about it's Star Wars. You have big name characters doing big things, and you want to see that on the board.
Yeah. Yep.
Do we want to
So
move on to kind of the nitty gritty, like how it's made question?
Yeah. I guess a question we should have started with is.
Sorry, Todd and I are laughing, I think, for the same reason, because I think we're both thinking, like, this isn't going to be the spectacular answer you're hoping it is.
Yeah.
Should we talk about? Oh, I was curious. So, having worked with the IACP, we work very intensely in our spare time. Usually, like a group. There's 7 of us, but we work in a group of 4. And then once we are done with the design, we put it out to the community to play test and iterate based on that. It's like a public beta testing system. But I was curious how it worked on your end as designing for FFG. Like, how many people did you guys have in studio working on content, because it's so much content in each box? And then what did the kind of playtesting? Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay.
Always 2 there are.
Except for when
Which is
there's a
actually really true.
Wow.
Like,
Goodness.
I think there was one instance where there was not a master and an apprentice, and it was Jabba's Realm, and that's why Jabba's Realm is the best.
The only other time that happened is when the team had 3 people on it, but we were also designing the app,
Yeah.
Wow.
which was actually like 1.25 people on a project.
Yeah.
So very small team. It's a lot of you sitting at a computer just churning out ideas, staring at Wikipedia, and
This is what we do.
Yep. You have to, right? Like, again, to get back to the point of you're working in a game with such a strong setting, right? That is like the reason you play this game and not a different game is because of the setting, right? Like, otherwise you would go have the freedom to make exactly the game you wanted,
Right.
instead of bringing this extra value to the table, right? So, which implies that you kind of have to design top down. So there's a lot of it that's like, what does this character do? How do I capture that?
Yes.
And then it doesn't really matter what I want the game to have. It has to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And then one kind of follow-up question to that was, we saw that there was kind of a slow pace of change when things did need to change, like with Spectre Cell getting changed, and even the Royal Guards there was a bit of a delay, but you guys were all, especially you, Todd, you were always very responsive, like personally, like rules question. I have so many rules questions that you answered by email. I was like very happy. I felt really happy, and like you were very responsive, but then the game as a whole was less so. Do you guys know why maybe it took longer for some things to change overall in the game?
Again, it's mostly just procedural, right? Like the burden to prove that something needs to be errata is high compared especially to the amount of data that we can actually gather to prove it. So
Essentially, every time you're in a big picture sense. Oh, did we lose Todd, or did he just get?
Oh, we lost
no, we
Isaac.
didn't lose Todd. I lost Isaac. But it looks like it's just his camera off. That's fine. Okay. If you think about it, from every favor you do the competitive community, you are doing a disservice to the casual community. Right? You are introducing a new element that can cause confusion, there may be differing versions out there. People may be coming to the table with like an errata sheet that doesn't match this product that someone has dipped. Like, I think I measured the value of my collection at, like, it's incomplete and it's like $700 or more, in terms of sticker price, and so when you have a crossover game like this, the bar to errata is high for a good reason, and it frustrated us in the moment at designers, but in retrospect, it really is a good thing. Because every time you do a favor to the competitive community, you do a disservice to the casual community. To varying degrees, but it is still something to be aware of.
Right, and that makes sense. Like, I have my launch day core box so I still have the officer and Royal Guard cards in their original text. If I wasn't as involved, then I'd pull those out, try to go to a game store, and then somebody say that's not how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah, so specifically that's the real problem, right? Is there's kind of 2 different skirmish markets, broadly speaking, right? There's the competitive skirmish player, and then there's what we think is the silent majority, probably by a ton, of people who once in a while play a game on their kitchen table. Errata is actually fine for both of those groups. Where it becomes an issue is if someone actually likes playing at their kitchen table enough that they want to show up and try to join the competitive scene. And just like, it becomes a community issue really quickly. Of like, I built this list, it's my favorite list, I show up and, half of my list doesn't do what it says, this game's garbage. Like, it's just an extremely frustrating experience for the person that we maybe want to most have a streamlined experience. So, I mean, there's a lot of different angles of looking at it. Some of it is just process, some of it is different values to different markets. Some of it is honestly, like what we talked about, there's 2 people on a team, and often we're not only working on one game line.
Yeah, and we're also usually, I would have when we were really on Imperial Assault, we're 2 boxes ahead.
Yep.
A lot of the time. Of the feedback that we're getting. So like, we would have been able to start incorporating meaningful feedback from the community from Twin Shadows into Jabba's Realm. if we're, partially. Because Jabba's realm would have been already started at that point. Right. Now we have our own internal stuff. So there's 3 layers of testing that's good for different things. There's internal, which is the most helpful for getting stuff done, because you don't only know when things went wrong, but you know why they went wrong. There's external, which will sometimes find things that you don't find. This is particularly beneficial for testing your communication about what's going on, much more so than the engine, right? Do you, as a person who haven't lived with this, understand what I'm trying to tell you about the game? Do you know how this token works? Do you know how this mechanic works? But in general, because they haven't lived with it like you have, they're not going to play more approximating the right way, or they're not, and they certainly won't understand why something went wrong, right? So there's a lot of parsing that sort of initial external feedback of like, this mission was terrible. It's like, okay, probably not though. What was actually wrong? And it's like, okay, it turns out that unit did something bad, or who knows? But then you get to the third layer, which is release feedback, which is like, okay, now we're into the wisdom of the masses, and all of that, like, we don't know how to play, but we're learning, will funnel into the most useful feedback of like, this doesn't work, in a way that we can't find on our own.
We'll tangent all day if you let us, but this actually touches on another topic, which is the game that you guys play is not the game that we know, right?
Yes.
We spend a year making a game that doesn't exist, and then like we make some final tweaks to it, and then we launch it, and like all of our experience with that piece was in a different form. So it launched in its best form, but we don't really understand it that well, to be perfectly honest. So when we make all the little final tweaks and make everything just right, and then we release them all together and they start interacting, they're kind of interacting in ways that we just never saw.
And couldn't.
Right.
Thank you. I think I skipped ahead a question. Isaac, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, we've seen really a lot of different characters, archetypes, designs, abilities, and all of that. Were there any specific characters or ideas or designs that you wanted to incorporate in but weren't able to get into the final product?
So many.
Yeah.
This is going to be like the quintessential probably can't talk about question, because it gets
Is
into...
it?
I mean, maybe Paul, your experiences are different. But
so if there are reasons why we couldn't release something, that's probably a can't talk about.
Yes. Yeah, I'm privy to a lot of things that I did want to do that were not doable.
Yeah.
There's a whole category of things I can't talk about.
I don't remember why we didn't do anything we didn't do, so I'm going to go ahead and speak out of ignorance. Obviously, we never did Yoda. We never did Scout Troopers. We never did an Endor box across the board. Todd and I had our Ice Climbers Ewok hero that we always fantasized about making that somehow did Ice Climber mechanics. With
Paul, I built that. I had it built.
Did you?
Yeah.
Sounds so cool.
Those are the big ones that pop to mind. There are probably other characters that we never did. I mean, again, I would love to, in general, just issue campaign fixes to all of the famous figures like we did for Skirmish.
So I think Paul hit the really big one. Yoda was a known point.
Yeah.
Yoda was just like obviously top of the pyramid. Of course we're gonna do it someday. Like that's always the plan.
Yeah.
And then it just like
never
somehow never found the right time, and then just ran out of time. Like that was the weirdest situation. That was the one that
hard
like
to
when we
do
wrapped.
Yoda.
It is also hard to do Yoda.
Yes.
Both mechanically and canonically, and I'm not even talking about interactions with LFL about. I don't think we ever did interact with LFL about Yoda. But
we never found a product that he would have been appropriate in.
Exactly.
It just never happened.
Right, as you're imagining, like, why is this guy accompanying this random scrappy band of rebels onto random adventures? Like, it made so much less sense than even like high-level Luke and all these other majorly important characters. You could be like, yeah, they're around. It's like, what the is Yoda doing? And it always seemed odd. And it so it just kind of never clicked, and so it never happened. Yeah, which was too bad.
Yeah, Yoda's
Just
the
a
big
bit
one.
of
When we get into the stuff after I left and don't have preview information, I think like I've seen a couple of your Mandalorian cards. Like those are the kinds of opportunities that we would always get excited about, right? Like, what's this new or beloved character that is not so fringe that doesn't actually belong in the universe? How can we play with it? Like that's.
And we never got to use any Rogue One stuff either, did we? Did we ever design any Rogue One? The
No.
Death Troopers.
Death Troopers made it into Tyrants.
Yes, I think by way of the TV show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they showed back up in Rebels and alongside Thrawn, so that would be the in.
That's how they snuck in.
Yep.
But again, it comes back to that same point of like, you can't put them in an Imperial Assault campaign box, because what are those characters going to do? A lot of them only become characters with relevance to the Alliance in the course of that movie and then die. So you
makes it tough.
You can't make a Rogue One box with the conceits of Imperial Assault.
Right. So I mean, you could ask the question, why didn't we do a figure wave? And then that just gets into like release schedule, bandwidth, the mundane answers that are unsatisfying, but the realities of.
And the fact that you can still incorporate them into a campaign, and then you're just like, again, I'm not speaking to any specific interactions with LFL about this because I don't think they even happened. Or at least I wasn't involved with them. So again, I'm just saying, not speaking about that from a purely like artistic design standpoint, right? You are still theoretically working within the confines of this game, and you would sort of break something a little bit to introduce these obviously dead characters, right? Like Jabba can show up because you're gonna be like, oh, it was before he died, I guess, and you can kind of squeeze it out, but that is just like, it's just wrong. The timing's off.
Yeah, I mean that's why Obi-Wan had to be done in a figure wave.
Oh yeah, we squeezed that with Obi-Wan. That's okay.
Yeah, we had the
dead guy wave.
Exactly, that's what we called it. Yeah,
That's what I've been calling it the whole time too.
Who else is the dead guy wave?
Grand Inquisitor.
Greedo and Obi-Wan.
Yes.
It's Grand Inquisitor and Greedo.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
no,
that was a
Paul
fun
actually
one.
got into a box. You're right.
I
Anyway.
enjoyed the dead guy wave. Who was the dead guy? Oh, Inquisitor.
Inquisitor,
That's right.
yeah.
Inquisitor was
Yeah.
the dead guy.
Right.
Man, that was a fun one. That was a fun wave to do because we didn't have the pressure of a whole campaign, and I feel like, I don't know, those are three of like my more favorite things we made. Those just three characters. I just thought they were interesting.
Yeah, they were really pointed in purpose, right? Like we've been talking about this point over and over and over again, but when you have to design something for both campaign and for skirmish, you're sacrificing something. And because those were only tangentially for campaign and were so iconic that they could kind of stand on their own feet, that meant we got to focus on skirmish, right? They had a single purpose we got to focus on.
And that's something, because I remember something quite specific when that release happened, is a good friend of mine, Alistair Scott. He realized quite early on, right when everything released, that Greedo would be something quite unexpected in the meta. Was that something you saw coming?
I think
I
Paul,
didn't.
I think Garrido was just like you jamming on a design. I don't know that I had a whole lot to do with it.
Pretty much. No, anticipating a meta without the resources of basically the only game in the world that can anticipate a meta is Magic the Gathering, because they dedicate,
They can't
and
do
even
it
then
either.
they can't really. Right, exactly. But they dedicate entire teams to anticipating metas. It to the point that it just wasn't worth my mental effort, because you're going to come up with something different than I do. And so I might as well just make stuff that's fun and hopefully non-exploitive.
Yeah, can I try and paraphrase what happened with Greedo, Paul? I feel like it was you had an inspired design with slow on the draw, flavorful. Then you made his attack stronger than a 4-point figure's normal attack to compensate for that. And then
Yes.
players figured out how to mitigate slow on the draw with line of sight shenanigans, and then
Yeah.
there you go. Is
Yep.
that pretty much what happened?
That was always intentional, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the general I mean, that's just a fun. Again, as long as it's not exploitable, that kind of design is entertaining to players, even casual players. If you can present them with a small puzzle of mitigating a weakness to take advantage of a strength, it just makes you feel so smart about yourself.
Yes.
Can be fun.
And I think to this day, it's Greedo is one of the best figures of it skates the line between good and too good.
Sure.
But that
there's only
weakness.
one of him, so it
Yeah.
doesn't matter as much if he's too good.
Exactly. No, if you could bring 4 of them, if he was just a common
Yeah.
hired gun and you could bring 4 of them, then there'd be issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just
Oh, go ahead, guys.
sorry. Yeah. So just quickly circling back to what you guys said about how Yoda is such a difficult figure to design for the game, both in terms of how do you fit him into the story, which is obviously not something we needed to really worry about as ICP, but also just in terms of mechanically. So slight cheeky question, but do you have any thoughts or opinions about how we designed our Yoda?
I'm looking him up. I remember reading it and I don't remember it.
Well, he's got like 5 abilities, so that might take a little bit.
I mean, I think that was, if I ever wrote up a draft of Yoda, it would be at least similar in concept. I think in my mind, if I was going to write a Yoda, it was going to be OT Yoda, not Clone Wars Yoda.
Was there ever any discussion of bringing Imperial Assault into Separatist Assault or Republic Assault?
I don't think so in any serious way. I think, I mean, we're sitting there at desks. We talked about, if you could imagine it, we discussed it
We probably
as developers, but in any serious manifestation, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's really hard to overstate how much campaign skews development for this game line.
Absolutely.
Right? Like there are things that Legion can do that this game just not can't, but combination of would be very difficult and shouldn't.
yes.
So I'll paraphrase Yoda's abilities while you're looking him up. He's basically
I've got it here.
Yeah, I've got him here.
He's basically 4 points. First for the viewers too. He's 4 points. He's got like 3 small utility abilities that help out, and then he has an action to focus a Force user, and then he has a deflection ability similar to Jedi Luke's, but it sends back damage equal to the dice rolled instead of just 1 damage, and it's limit once per round.
With then his other 2 abilities being Calming Presence, allowing him to heal harmful conditions, and then Wisdom to cycle a command card.
Right.
Draw 1, put 1 on the top, on the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, in terms of, I think, okay. Now, I remember I did have a draft of Yoda once, and I believe in my draft, he got an auto dodge on every attack. I don't remember how it worked, but that was the Yoda, is you just couldn't attack. You either needed a way to kill a dodge or a way to do direct damage. And he had low health because of it, but he really broke the general contract of the game in that sense. Otherwise, same basic conceit of just utility, the ultimate utility figure, basically.
Yeah, I mean that's the prompt, right? Is how do you make a guy who just sits there and who just warps reality around him?
Yeah,
Pretty much. Just the challenge was how do we make people bring him out of the deployment zone? Because yeah, and that's where the deflection ability came out of is, well, let's make it so you have to put him next to your other figures so he does something useful, and that's
Exactly.
where it was.
Yeah, my intent, I would probably start from a very similar place, and then I would immediately try some version of an aura.
Yeah.
Probably be mine. You have to be within X spaces of him to get these just rule bending abilities.
So one of so speaking to there's an interesting thing around the perception of content with there may be something that is cool, right, when you actually get into it, or like if you understand the mechanics of the game is powerful and you understand that. And then but also there's that level of pull it out of the box and feel right. And that's kind of probably where I started with the +1 dodge to your defense results, right? From just eyeball test, whoa, he is special. And and so then you start to feel those Star Warsy feelings before you're even playing the game, before you're even parsing how this works mechanically. You go, whoa, and think about how cool Yoda is. Similar thing with Maul. When we were making, Maul, I think we like had to pull extra hours on because he just like wasn't working because he was fine, but he was boring. He didn't feel like Maul. And until we eventually came up with the you can't die until you've activated, which is very useful mechanically and has all sorts of cool uses and exploits, but also has that out of the box benefit of you read the words "you cannot be defeated" and you feel like you have just unpacked something special.
That's awesome.
He's still. I played him a lot even before IACP got to him, and he's still one of my favorite figures in the game. So bravo on that one.
So do we have this on the list? Do we need to talk about Spectre Cell? Is there anything that you guys wanted to talk about regarding that? I think Todd probably more so, but
yeah, I didn't even make Spectre Cell. I think I was there for a card council for it as a freelancer and was like, seems fine. You do Skirmish. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you guys understand the issue, right? So that card has to do some heavy lifting in order to put together figures that should not be put together, right? Like it was trying to create a pre-built army. A very small part of this, I don't want to overstate this, but a very small part of the intent was giving people an entry point into competitive Skirmish, because I know that's something that Skirmish players have been asking for a very long time. It's like, my friend is interested, but how the hell do you start? And there just was like never really an answer to that. And so we were trying to create this opportunity that's like, okay, well, you can start here. And it's, our goal was for it to be like B tier. Like you could play it and you can win games, but it shouldn't really be winning. You shouldn't be beating good players or the best players, for example. That was where we wanted to put it. And then just by the inherent challenge of what it had to do, we felt like we had to push it just to the moon, because otherwise in particular, I think the command card overlap was just very poor, and we had a really, really hard time figuring out how you would build a tournament viable list out of this thing. And then playtesting was just like, no, it just needs to be better. Just needs to be better. These figures just aren't. They don't want to be together. Stop making me. So we pushed it, right? And
isn't that the central conceit of the entire show, though? That there are a bunch of characters who wouldn't be working together unless circumstances push them together?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and they kill everything.
Or survive everything and conveniently don't look when things die.
Yeah.
Branding.
Okay, well, I mean, I just wanted to give an opportunity for that. Did we want to talk about like faction design and faction identity? Is there any of that in Skirmish design?
I don't think there is any It was their faction identity.
So
Paul, was all accidental.
Paul, I was going to throw this to you before I. This was one of the things I slammed my head against probably the hardest over the years. Was I had like, every designer has just like grids of theory crafting, and then as soon as you turn around, they fall apart. But it's a place to start. And it always kind of struck me as odd that it was very, very easy to understand. What a trooper does, or what a smuggler does, or like, but it was very hard to understand what makes an Imperial, what makes a scum unit. And I never figured that out, to be perfectly honest. Like, I don't think that there was certainly never a design doc or a design Bible or something when I started, and I was never able to reverse engineer anything either. It periodically drove me insane that that Imperial troopers were more like Rebel troopers than other Imperial units. I was like, there's got to be. This is strange. Why can't I fix it? And I never answered that. I never solved it.
Yeah, there. So for starters, no, there was no ever any intention. I think the closest thing there came to be an intention of a faction design is that scum units do strain damage. That's about it.
Which, if we think that through a little bit, is unsurprising that there would be a difference between Imperial and mercenary units, because those are actually meaningfully different in campaign.
Yes.
But the Rebel faction doesn't exist in campaign, not really.
Right.
And so I don't think that there was ever like a fundamental, spectrum established or stakes planted in the ground around mechanics.
Yeah. I mean, a Rebel faction has a de facto difference of just like way more unique figures because of the way campaign works, but again, that's just a byproduct. It's not the thing about a game as big as Imperial Assault with a team as small as Imperial Assault had is that you very rarely have the luxury of thinking about why you're doing something. Beyond the immediate. I remember Todd was actually very good at this. Todd drove me bonkers when we first hired him because I was trying to get Hoth finished. And he kept asking me questions about why things were the way they were. And I would just turn around at my desk and say, because they are. Now shut up and let me work. We eventually got some time to delve into those questions and make some more meaningful content because of them. But even still, especially when things are already so set, right? Like there is no meaningful delineation from the beginning on, and so how are you going to bake one in the back half? The other thing is that you are starting from a place of what does this unit do in the Star Wars universe. That is the A1 design principle for anything you create is what does this do in the established universe. And when you answer that question accurately, you're often not aligning with a game faction ethos, right? I mean, Todd mentioned stormtroopers and rebel troopers. Why do these feel more like, just because they are? They sit in hallways and they shoot at other stuff that sits in hallways. That's what they do in the movies, and so that's what they do in the game. And stormtroopers in the movies move around and shoot people, and rebel troopers sit and shoot people, and so that's what they do in the game. And it's as simple as that. And because that is your top design principle more than anything else, there can't be faction unity, because the things in the factions do incredibly different things in the movies. So,
that makes sense.
Bummer, I guess.
Yeah, it's prohibitively difficult to staple it in there. I'm not going to say it can't be done. It's just extremely difficult. And again, with the game, like Paul was saying, the reason you go through the trouble of doing this top-down design is because it does bring value, right? Like, there may not be a cohesive mechanical theme to the Imperial faction, but it's the faction that plays Vader, right? And Vader sure does play a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the topic of Empire, then, Zillow Technique, because that was a very big, here is what this faction is going to do kind of card. What was the thought process behind that?
I'm trying to remember exactly what all I stapled on this card.
It was like...
that was forever ago. That was a lifetime ago.
Yeah,
that came in the Blaze pack.
It's
this was one of my oops.
Reduces Pierce, and at any time you can discard one command card to apply a block.
Yeah.
This may have stemmed out of, at the time, the observance that the Rebel faction had a lot more white dice and the Imperial faction had a lot more black dice.
That's exactly what it was.
And we were giving Pierce away much more cheaply than we were giving away damage.
Yes.
And it was causing just even regardless of the meta or of data, it was just causing like a theoretical skew in the way that what you're paying for gets applied to your enemy. So I think we were trying to specifically in the Empire devalue how cheaply other factions or even Imperial units could get Pierce.
That makes sense.
I think that was the prompt.
It was. That Pierce was considered less valuable than damage because damage was automatic and Pierce required blocks to get through. And Imperial units were way more likely to have black dice and therefore have blocks to get eaten up by Pierce. And figures with white dice wouldn't get eaten up by Pierce because they'd only have evades or a single block. And so, yeah, the Pierce was misplaced against that faction, and then it went way too far.
Yeah, I can almost guarantee that second was that we didn't want to print a 0-cost upgrade here, so we tried a 1, and then in testing it just wasn't strong enough for 1, so we put something else on it. I can almost guarantee that that's what happened.
But it actually has contributed to almost creating a faction identity within Empire, because you see it in every Empire list now in Skirmish. So now Empire is kind of the faction that stops Pierce and is very defense and tanky.
Got there.
You kind of did it by accident.
Yeah. Well, between that and then Gideon 3PO in Rebel and Scum.
Yeah, that Zillow Technique was really Todd trying to catch up to my oops. It was like he was jealous of everyone telling me how bad I screwed up the game at
That's right.
With 3PO.
I think someone brought us cards one day and we signed them. I think we signed our biggest mistakes. I think you signed a 3PO and I signed a Zillow.
That's great.
Oh, that's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go. No, you go ahead. No.
I was gonna say, do you want to talk about skirmish maps? I know there's always talk about making new skirmish maps in IACP, but it's definitely a challenge, and it's amazing how many you guys made, especially with such a small team, and a lot of them are really well balanced. I say.
Stunning. It's really stunning.
A lot of them we read and it's like, no, this is obviously imbalanced, but like just the sheer number, there's a lot of good ones, but like we're coming up on the edge of everything that's been published. Like we've gone through a lot of maps. You guys made a lot of maps.
Yep.
So it's
a lot easier to make a balanced skirmish map than it is to make a balanced campaign mission, right? I mean, it's symmetrical, right? I mean, just like. I don't know, maybe I oversimplify it, but you do there were some basic math tests that we would do, like, is this thing going to be in range of one move or two, and will it be within range of one move or two? If when you're placing stuff willy-nilly, you realize that one objective is 5 spaces away from one starting zone and 6 spaces away from another starting zone on the opposite side. Okay, like, that's within, the difference between 6 and 7 and 5 and 6 is huge, right? And so just kind of knowing what's going to be out there and running those basic tests and which side is going to have more blocking terrain on it, and just kind of some eye tests. But in general, people are bringing their own balance to a skirmish mission, and we just have to make sure we stay out of their way. And let them play the game. Whereas campaign, we have to provide what the Imperial player can even do.
Yeah, I've over the years I found that symmetry is just your best friend when you're making skirmish maps, because any tiny imbalance can be abused. I think I saw it was either a semifinals or a finals of a regional at the FFG game center at the time. And just a slight imbalance in one of the maps, one player was able to grab an objective, pull it back behind a wall, and then the whole map turned into a shooting lane.
Yeah.
And the opponent couldn't do anything, and I think they conceded like before the end of the first round. I was like, this is okay. Noted. Do not give people terrain advantages.
Yes.
Um,
That sounds like a very particular map, but
Yeah, I think to that extent, kind of a sum up of what we both said is making making a campaign map is about making what people can and should do. Making a skirmish map is very much about making sure you're thinking about what people shouldn't do. And just making sure those aren't there. And then beyond that, as long as those things aren't there, people find the game in it.
Yeah, so with that said, there's a couple other things that maybe are worth elaborating on. When designing skirmish maps for a wave or a campaign box or something like that, we definitely had a ranked order of like, these are tournament viable, these are tournament
yes, we did. Yes.
and some of them, like when you know you're building a map that isn't tournament viable, that's where you put your like crazy ideas where you're like, this sounds like fun at the kitchen table, but like, boy, if someone brings the wrong list or optimizes too hard, this whole thing doesn't work. Or like, boy, that shooting lane's real long. If you're playing a melee versus ranged lineup, you're dead. There are a lot of things that can cause a map to not be tournament viable.
the one where everybody's getting pulled into the Sarlacc pit. That one was very fun to play once.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 110 or something skirmish
crazy.
missions on 55 maps.
Yeah, like every figure pack had to have one, which is
That's
where
amazing.
It was like, okay, all right, I'll give you a map, but you're not gonna like it. If you are ever going to try making your own maps, I would suggest doing some like rudimentary heat mapping, some kind of analysis of like how far can you move from the starting zone, like charting out your 4s and 5s. The other real big thing is just determining like the hot points, like individual spaces that sure would be neat if people cared about, and then you put incentives there. Because if you let people, they will just like, they'll never explore the corners of the map, right? So if you don't give someone a reason to go to a space, most spaces in any given map won't get played. So it's not just the map, it's also objective placement. You're like, where do I want people fighting over on this tile? Because if I let you fight on this tile, I know what you're going to do. But if I make you come out here, I can make it a little uncomfortable, and I can cause some interaction.
That makes sense.
Yeah, like
I think the other big thing is really trying to get an understanding of the danger versus value, right? And we got really good at that to the point of it becoming instinctual, and now I don't think I could even put out a theory of it anymore. But like of the feel of like what makes something worth 4 points to risk it. You know, and to the point where what you want to avoid, right, is your fundamental how to make games ethos, in my opinion, is how do you want people to play the game so that it will be fun, and then how do you make that the correct way to play the game, right? So the way you know, one of Todd's sayings when he came in was people don't play games for fun, people play games to win. And that's really, really true. And I've adopted it into everything that I do. People don't play games for fun, they play games to win. They want to have fun while they're winning. And so you make winning fun. The way you go about winning correctly, you try and make that fun. That's particularly true in serious competitive games. That it's so easy to, but I see it in campaign too. I mean, to the point where I think, I'm getting involved. I was just feeling this IA itch because I've just been doing music for so long now. I'm getting involved in a play by forum game on.
Oh, nice.
Just for shits and giggles, and I was lurking on some of them, and I think like dungeon crawl game, like it's actually so ingrained in people who play like the casual game competitively to play it in such a crappy way, because that's how you win so many dungeon crawling games, that I think they're actually hindering themselves, because I just see people dropping big figure, get in the way, block, and I think we actually did a pretty good job of making that not optimal, where you'll lose a lot of the time if you do that, because the thing will die, or you can move through it with, you know, move spaces ability. But I mean, people try and exploit things, and you want to not let them.
Yeah, the adage I've heard is players will optimize the fun out of the game if you give them the chance to.
Oh, they sure will. Especially in a game like this where if you want to shoot 11 spaces, you can do it. And so, like, gotta be real careful about those shooting lanes.
So speaking of shooting lanes, would you say that you put a lot of thought into creating specifically sniper maps such as Errata versus melee maps such as Chorus and back alleys, and then the hybrid maps such as Mos Eisley back alleys? Or did that just naturally occur as a byproduct of the design?
A little bit of both. Like, we always knew that we needed a mix. Like, you go sufficiently far into the game line, and then we had a decent understanding of how the needs of organized play, right? So, like, we knew there was going to be a map rotation. We knew it was going to cycle like this. We knew that, you know, one map out, one map in, that brings with it certain restrictions, right? Like, if I take out a sniper map, I need to put something comparable in, unless I want to completely shake up the meta, which we did from time to time. Sometimes we're like, I don't like this meta. Can we change it with maps? And sometimes the answer was yes.
Definitely.
So how much intention was put into the map rotation of we want the rotate out a sniper map, put in a sniper friendly map, versus like how often was that versus we're going to shake things up, or there's this map we really like, we're just going to throw it in because that's what we want. Like how did that process go when it came time to decide the next rotation?
Fly by feel. I mean, both were always on the table. Like, it's because maps have two objectives. It's really rare that there's a map that you really like both of, and you're like, man, I really want people to experience this. By the time it comes around to competitive play, it's often like, okay, which of these isn't a trash fire?
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, not only did we have to make maps all the time, but they each had to have 2 viable missions on them. And if one of them wasn't viable, it was all non-viable.
Or at least it would have a significant meta
right
impression, which then cycles back into the, like, we were always monitoring it, right? Like, the map spread has an obvious impact on play, and we're designers, right? We have play intent. We're not just creating a sandbox, handing you chainsaws and covering our ears.
That's a good one.
So yeah, it was always top of mind. From individual rotation to rotation, it could range anywhere from the entire reason we picked to it didn't matter, we had multiple viable options.
So from a tournament standpoint, do you have a favorite map you've designed? Because I think there is an answer that most of the community would agree is the most balanced one, and that a lot of people say is their favorite. And I'm actually curious whether that's the same one you would consider your favorite as well.
I don't remember what any of them are.
I'll be honest, the first map that comes to mind is the first wave IG-88 Death Laser, because it's just so memorable.
That one was pretty fun. I'm glad that was in rotation. I don't think it would. I don't think it's in our thing of where we want the game to go, but it was very fun to have that.
Yeah, it had balance issues, but it was a good experience.
So I've poured.
My guess is I would like the Sarlacc one. That's that's my jam. Is stupid crap like that. It's
honestly, they're a blur. I honestly don't remember.
Yeah.
They are. Yes. I mean, when I think of a skirmish map, I just picture this gray-brown blob with red and blue on either side, and 6 things worth 3 points in the middle, and I cannot distinguish between them beyond. Yeah. That's what pops into my head.
That's entirely fair. But while we're talking about maps, we've been the community. We've been trying to push more into 4-player lately. What was? Can you give us some stories about putting 4-player into the game?
4-player sure barely works.
4-player works enough to exist to say that we made 4-player, and then we shoved it out the door.
Yeah, it is very politics reliant. Like the 2v2 game modes probably don't really function from an incentive perspective.
Yeah,
I do know that I misprinted one of the 4-player maps.
I emailed you about that one. It was the players score individually, which then multiplies all their scores because they're all friendly to each other.
It was something like that, yeah. I built a map where there was supposed to be an inside and an outside, and I think I switched the values for them.
And
it made it to print like that.
Oh.
It still works, but it's not as good as it should have been.
Yeah.
4-player is rough. I have rarely seen a 4-player game end well. without at least one person just getting completely dunked on
Yeah.
and not having a fun time.
Oh, like in a free for all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we
think
used to-
that's just a problem with any 4-player free-for-all game is that it's going to turn into a 3v1 at least one point.
It will, yeah, and the game is so minutely tactical that the amount of effort you have to put in to play it not poorly isn't at the same level as how much control you actually have over a 4-player game.
I mean, the problem is that it's a multiplayer attrition game, right? I mean, so as soon as one person starts to lose, they become the best target for everybody. Whereas if you think about like your fundamental 4-player game of like Super Smash Brothers, right? When someone starts to lose, you actually kind of don't want to attack them because you want to get someone else's score down. Because if someone's been falling off a bunch, then you have to go kill the person who's been doing all the killing, so that you can get above theirs, right? And so whereas in a 2-player Imperial Assault, the attrition is fair because it's going back and forth and there is no dunking. It's just the appropriate consequences of your actions. So it just fundamentally is not meant for 4 because it's an attrition game, and attrition games with 4 people, it's the correct thing to do to ruin someone's day if their day has started to be ruined.
Yeah, specifically with the scoring, right? It's a little bit like, you know, playing Halo or something in free for all, and you can watch 2 people fight each other, and then you pick up both kills. Like, it just...
Yeah, because you're farming score from people in 4-player instead of having a stock. So maybe it would have been like if you had started at 40 or whatever points, and then as you lose figures, your score goes down compared to the rest of the table. Maybe that would have fixed it.
Or honestly, just fight to elimination or something. Yeah, I don't know, but it probably warrants a different scoring method.
Yeah.
A 4-player fight to elimination. I hope we have all day, or we could just get out Twilight Imperium instead.
Yeah, it raises serious questions about what do objectives even do. Like, it's the start of a prompt, not a not a solution.
Well, good luck. Have fun. It fundamentally doesn't work. Good luck.
Yeah.
I before we get too far down the road, I do want to circle back quickly. What is the map that you guys all like?
Oh, yeah.
So this has been my perception, but the competitive community does seem to enjoy Mos Eisley back alleys the most. It is the most symmetrical, with objectives in the middle and corners of all the maps, with long sniping corridors for sniping lists, and a lot of corners close enough to be able to get to the center of the map for melee lists. So you could have a map where a Han Rangers list and a Vader list could play, and it would be pretty much as balanced as it could be.
This is the one with the door gambit, right?
Yes.
Yes.
From the Jawa pack.
It's basically a figure 8.
Yep. Yeah, I think I see your article where you guys put it back in. I remember stumbling on this concept of like, how do you get melee in range of actually just not being dead on arrival?
Oh, is this the first one where you introduce doors? The doors that open at the end of round 2 or whatever?
The auto open. It's certainly one of the ones I did that.
Yeah.
That was a huge realization. That helped.
Yeah, it's now known as Uskru doors, but this, when I was looking through, this is actually one of the first missions that had that mechanic of at the end of every round 2 doors open. So this is one of the ones where they're not locked, so people can open the doors themselves, or they'll open on their own, and so you can't really hide all that much behind the doors.
Yeah. It's sort of the recognition that there's almost 2 different games that happen. One that happens in the first round and one that happens in the rest of the rounds.
Yeah.
And it's sort of allowing those 2 games to happen more freely.
Yeah, which is one of my favorite things about Skirmish is that like first round setup, positioning, jockeying, and then all hell breaks loose after that. And that's like a very fun like development of gameplay to me.
Yeah. And it really turned into such a science as well, you know, when you had people who really loved one certain list and just stuck with it and played nothing but that for a long time. Eventually, you know, they would just go, okay, it's this map, this mission, I want this deployment zone. I know exactly where all my figures are at the end of round 1 before even starting the map. Okay, you're running IG-88, okay, that changes the math in this way, I'm going to send on this space instead. And that was really, really, really interesting and enjoyable.
That was so impressive to me. Like, I don't think I've ever played a game of Skirmish without the regret my deployment phase. Like, you put everything down, you're like, that makes sense. And then, like, literally 5 seconds later, it's like, okay, round 1. Why have I done this?
So I had a question about terminals. Actually, going back to skirmish maps, I have poured through pretty much every skirmish map you guys have made as we've tried to find viable candidates for tournament play, and I noticed a progression of from the early ones. You have terminals that are kind of almost in random places, sometimes in the middle of the map to like get people to go there. Obviously, and then after Twin Shadows and as we go into later maps, you almost always have the terminal like 3 or 4 spaces away from the deployment zone, ostensibly probably I'm guessing for R2. And we've had this debate of like, or I don't know if that's true, but we had this debate of like, should we always keep those only use those maps where the terminals are close to the deployment zone for that reason.
What we found was that terminal advantage is crazy.
Yeah.
And if you
the
point an
command
objective,
cards. Sorry, the command card. The background to why it is because the command card system is so fundamentally flawed that you have a tiered card play system with no resource cost in game. The only resource cost is whether you can put it in the deck or not, but there is nothing stopping one player from playing 9 points worth of cards on their first turn and the other player playing 0, simply from the fact of having drawn it. And so because of that, more equitable and constant card draw across both players meant that diminished because both people were more likely to see most of their deck. And it was something you had to handle, but basically barring extenuating circumstances, it just basically changed the rules to you draw 2 cards per turn.
There were certain times in the tournament landscape where I was convinced that if you showed me the draw order of players, I could tell you who won the tournament, like without watching matches. And I kind of stand by that. I
like which cards they drew at which point in the game.
Yeah, if you showed me the order of their deck and
I
didn't tell me anything about what happened during the game, I could probably pick the winner some crazy percentage of the time.
That makes sense.
So what we found is that terminal advantage is absolutely nutty. If you can hold an extra terminal over your opponent, you can actually win the game by doing nothing, right? So if you manage to lodge yourself into an advantageous position, not only are you advantaged, but your opponent has to do something, which makes putting terminals out in the center kind of awkward, especially when who gets to control the center is often dictated by player order. Or at various times in the game's history, activation count, which was a very dumb thing we did not want to give additional advantage to.
Oh God, I remember. Yeah, we didn't used to be able to pass.
No, there was a before times.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that's a big part of why I think we moved terminals out of the center. Is we figured that I would rather have you fight over mission objectives than over this core resource that has so much randomness and just, there's enough. Terminals are doing enough.
Yeah.
From there, I think the realization is very similarly, if I want both players to have a terminal, they have to be protectable. Otherwise, the person who gains an advantage will be able to pressure his opponent off of the terminal, which potentially worse than having to go out in the center and fight for one, is when we assume that something is free for you, and then it just completely isn't. So I think it's a little bit of a cursed problem that we never quite solved of how do you make terminals interactable. And so we kind of just de-emphasized that part of the game.
No, makes sense.
So
in terms of the command card issue, is that something you figured out before? And I guess this is more directed to you than Paul. Before or after R2 was put into the game?
Oh, after. I didn't understand this game until Jabba's Realm. I had no idea what I was doing. To be fair, I mean, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus because the people who worked on this game are very smart, very capable designers. Skirmish was so ridiculously under-considered by comparison to the campaign at the release of the core set.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be stunned if it was 90-10. Serious in terms of like the attention and consideration it got.
I'd be surprised if it was that.
Yeah.
Like,
we released a game that was unfinished and that we didn't know what it was. Beyond what Todd said about we released a game that we don't know what, like we didn't know. We hadn't done any of the due diligence, in my opinion, to call Skirmish a game mode. I mean, now to be fair, campaign mode was also a hot mess because we didn't understand that yet, and it had 90% of the focus. It's hard to make a new game on this scale. Nigh impossible.
core sets are hard.
Yes. So I don't want to take anything away from that, but it had very, very low consideration. And I think something of the tacit assumption that, like, it would work because the system would work. We could just take the costing and move it over and it'll work okay. And there were a lot of these systems that just weren't considered. The command card being a huge one. I don't know if we understood command cards being a problem until Jabba. When we were just sitting there, and I think Todd had the realization, like, it doesn't cost me anything to play a 3-point card. Why doesn't it cost me anything to play it? Right? Just the game state is so broken in that way by comparison to any game that has ostensibly different valued cards that you are allowed to play. Right? You know, there is a resource cost to doing any of that, and there just isn't. It's just luck. and so no, we didn't understand any of that. We didn't understand what command cards should do, could do, would do. We didn't understand what was valuable in the game. Not a chance. And we certainly didn't understand what figures were worth. Not even close. Right? So no, it was such a fundamentally misunderstood system. And that, like, it had enough, it made enough sense. Like, oh, sure, everyone has the same, you know, that it stands up to, it doesn't stand up to, you know, a lot of scrutiny, but it didn't get a lot of scrutiny. So it had enough that it made enough sense. And it's like, sure, it's even, right? It's like, it's not. It's just not at all. And that's another thing, too. With the idea of balance, where the skirmish went up, but the campaign actually has come down overall over time in its power level to where it should. And this is where I talk about, like, where things should be. We figured out where the game should be and evened it. And things can be balanced and bad. Right? Yes. Like, if I write a card that says your entire opponent's faction, you know, army takes 10 damage, that game is technically balanced because both players can take it.
Right.
It's also terrible. And I mean, that's obviously a dumb hypothetical, but it exists for, you know, without honestly that much obfuscation in the campaign core set with subversive tactics and Gideon being on either side. Is you are just handing both sides nuclear weapons and saying, okay, go have fun. And you may even be able to make an argument that with those on either side it's balanced, but it isn't fun. It's just a mess. And so there's very much that as well, of not only figuring out what is fair valued, but also what's even fun to introduce into the game. And avoiding that, even if it is fairly costed.
That's been a really big focus of IACP too. At least since I joined, we've really pushed on, like, yeah, is this balanced? Is this fair? But more importantly, what is fun to play and what's, like, leads to fun gameplay and gameplay loops.
Right. We want people coming back to play after their first game of IACP.
I see.
I think we touched on
Customers.
The main questions for, like, you guys. Do you guys have any thoughts or feedback on what ICP has been doing or what you've seen on the project?
Or are there any warnings that you want to say? If you haven't already done this, don't do this.
Oh God, I know there are, but I can't think of what they are.
Send us an email.
Yeah. It's that classic intern situation, right? Where your intern is like, tell me about this game. You're like, there's nothing to tell. And then they'll be like, what about this idea? Nope. What about this idea? Nope. You only... The lessons I've learned are in there, but like, not accessible.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious to hear you guys talk a little bit about shepherding the metagame from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like,
I mean,
like specifically, what does the ability to create brand new cards bring to the table in your like season format?
I can say that well, first of all, there are actually things that I've figured out we should not do, and so we like have all these boundaries we've created, which is like you can't give Empire too much card draw because they have Zillow Technique, so they'll just turn it into all these extra blocks.
For the same reason, we can't make cheap units in Empire with innate defenses, because once you combine that with Zillow Technique, then they become near unkillable. You have to use 4 or 5 attacks to gain 4 points. We try to avoid that.
Which then splashes into Scum as well, with the existence of Temporary Alliance, which has certainly been a pain from time to time. That you design a figure that is perfectly balanced in Scum, such as the original version of the Trandoshan Hunters that we fixed up, and then you try them out in Empire, you just go, no, God, no, please.
Right, and so that's kind of been a design area that we started in with Bib, where he can't be in the same army as a rebel unit, just to avoid getting too much focus into one list. But I think that's a design area we could expand on more, of having things that either in the rules tell you can't play this with non-faction units, or make them in such a way that they only really work with in-faction units.
Yeah.
Another one.
That was one of that focus thing. That was one of our favorite little bits of cleverness, I think, was adding the ability clause when this figure attacks, it becomes focused, as just our little like you to all the focus that was flowing around. It's like, you didn't make that figure any better.
That's actually one of my favorite designs you guys have done, is the like autofocus being like, this actually just is a 3 dice figure that can't be focused, is what it actually is, but it doesn't read that way to new players.
What it is.
Yeah, so we've been using that a lot, and it's just a really good way to make a more flexible unit.
I mean, Dengar, Diala, I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, and new players are always like, seems really strong that it gets automatically focused each time, and we're like, well, it actually means you can't make it stronger with focus.
So that's a really, really cool also interaction between the out of the box value without giving the gameplay value. It like that is a thing that's like super exciting to look at. It's just a 3 dice figure. It's actually a limitation if you break down. Yeah, it feels like this super powerful thing, and it's actually a restriction. So that was pretty inspired. That was really clever.
Something else we've noticed is we keep accidentally making new on the lambs, and we have now made it a very strong do not make on the lamb policy.
Yeah,
but things that are as powerful as on the lamb, or just like literally like lets you move.
That cancels.
Anything that cancels an attack, that basically says you attacked. I'm going to take that away from you. My figure survives when it should not.
Your attack was wasted. Yep. That is, people really. It's just such a huge feel bad, and things keep accidentally doing that, where it's like, I attacked. Oh, this interacts in such a way that your attack now doesn't matter. So. That's been
another
funny.
thing that has been especially fun with designing new cards is trying to find a way to look at the existing cards and buff them in a way which doesn't directly change the card. So I think 2 good examples of that would be the Darksaber and Krennic that we've designed. So Krennic takes an existing feature in the game, which are power tokens, and then lets you double them. So a Stormtrooper plays a power token, gets +2 damage instead of 1, but takes a strain. Only troopers can do it. So it's a figure making other figures better. And then the Darksaber, essentially it was our idea to make Maul very, very good. Jake thinks we made Maul way too good.
This is a meme.
Without, but also giving it to Sabine without making Sabine absolutely broken, because just looking at the stats, Sabine is better than Maul in a nutshell. And so all we did with that one is you get to perform a free attack melee with 1 red die. But with Maul, who auto-focuses, he gets a lot of value out of it. With Sabine who doesn't, it's take it or leave it. And that's really been a very insightful challenge to tackle and try and find solutions without just going, okay, rewrite the entire card. How can we try and change the game through other effects than going back and rewriting things?
Yeah, actually, I'd love for you guys to pull up the Dr. Afra card. I don't know if you've seen it. If you look at it, because there's two bits of design on that I think we have started to do really well. The first one being is what Isaac was talking about, where we have a card that flavorfully connects to two different characters, like the Darksaber with Sabine and Maul, and then with Afra, she connects to BT and 000. We know BT is already pretty strong on his own and doesn't need help, but then 000 is a little less so. So we were like, how do we buff one figure without making the other figure too strong? And we've learned how to like pinpoint certain designs of different cards of like we can call this like the missile salvo we found out is just not very good. So if we buff it missile salvo, it's like that's okay. It's not going to make him any stronger because his strength is his 4 dice attack. And then 000 we say, oh, if he could do the self-focusing damage thing, I think evasive procedure, like if that was stronger, he would actually be a lot better. So we buff that, and that is kind of a way we can like tweak cards to different figures to like make one not so strong but make the other stronger with kind of the same card text.
I can't find Dr. Afra. I'm not sure where I would.
Are you looking at Tabletop Admiral or?
Oh
Yeah,
no!
I'll post a link in the chat. I put a link in the chat.
There we go.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Except take initiative.
And then
that freaking card.
And now
So
excavation.
This is something that you can do that we wouldn't. Right? That is, we would look at that internally and be like, we can't print that. Right? That's too inside baseball. Like, that's going to confuse people. It's going to annoy people, and it takes up so much card real estate for what it's doing. Like, but you guys who are existing solely in this community can absolutely do that, and it takes on a very important meaning. Right? I mean, do you agree, Todd? Like, that's something we would never print on a figure.
The take initiative thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't.
And we tried really hard to not do that.
We really did.
We kept, and we can talk about this excavation ability more, but we tried so hard to like, how do we not make it so people are just take initiating over and over and over again with this card, right? Because we initially realized we couldn't have it be playing expensive cards from the discard pile. That was too strong. So we ended up with the 0 to 1, but we're like, but take initiative 0, that's the cheapest you can get a card, and so we can't, how do we go below 0? Then you can't play anything with it. Eventually we're just like, let's just say accept taking it. It's just...
I'm surprised you haven't removed take initiative from the game.
Yeah, me too.
We've actually talked about it, but
we would have if we thought it would like fly. We didn't ban any cards, but if we would have, it would have been that one.
There's a reason though.
We
Go
actually
ahead, Jake.
discussed that, and we've been discussing that from day one. So I guess that's what I'm bringing to the table. Is I've been on IACP since day one. I think it was season 3 for both of you. But
yeah,
but we talked about like, is take initiative, should we ban that or nerf it like we did with On the Lam and Assassinate? But what the conclusion we came to is that you can't ban take initiative, because then if you have it too predictable on who gets initiative when, then it's then one person will set up to get last activation on round 2 and then first activation round 3. If that's guaranteed, you would then get 2 activations in a row with your most powerful figure, and that can just wreck an opponent. So
really
you have to have that counterplay of, oh, maybe he has taken initiative. If I didn't draw my negation, I can't guarantee this. So having that uncertainty there really is important. I think if we were to take it out, then I think the way you change the game to accomplish that would be to have a coin flip for initiative at the beginning of every round.
And that's really what we realized, because Paul and Todd, I'm not sure if you guys ever heard about this, but the Imperial Assault community, we ran something after I think it was the 2018 World Championships, called the No 16 event. It was an online tournament where every single deployment card and command card that was featured in any top 16 worlds list was banned. And that showed us a lot about the core mechanics of what makes this game what it is. And we realized then very quickly that okay, well, sentries are actually ridiculously good, just slightly below where they need to be, which is why they have such a minor change in IACP. And we also realized, okay, the game without take initiative is incredibly static, and the ability for tactical, the ability for the play versus counterplay versus counterplay really goes away with take initiative. That the way that card shapes the game was shocking to everyone, I think, to figure out.
And by the way,
it was still a very fun event.
X-Wing,
I loved it.
X-Wing Miniatures is actually struggling with this right now, where they are having a hard time figuring out the first player, second player thing, and they've said if it just swaps back and forth predictably, then you're always going to have one player that's going to pull back on the turn they don't have it, and then they're going to be aggressive on the turn they do, and it becomes very predictable. And I'm like, you guys just need to take initiative and negation in your game, and that solves the whole problem.
I'm surprised that actually solves the issue, right? Like 1 card in 15. It seems like you would just play as if it didn't exist, and then sometimes you lose, but usually you win.
I think that's how you could do it for a lot of the game's history, but with the eve of hunters and the ability for a weak way to one-shot any figure in the game, then suddenly leaving your Han, if you were to put yourself in a position where, okay, if I have initiative, I'm going to win, but if I lose the initiative, I lose. If you're at a high-tier tournament, you're not going to leave it up to there. And so what the mantra of a lot of good players, I know that this was Daniel Taylor's mantra for a long time, assume your opponent has everything that you don't want them to have. And when you play that way, okay, suddenly there's so much tactical necessity to it, which is really what I like. I mean, obviously there are some issues with the command card system, but that's really what makes it interesting. Every time you attack a smuggler, you have to think about on the lam. Every single time you have loss activation, you have to think about take initiative. And all of these things, and how just a few cards, heightened assassinate tools, can suddenly turn Greedo into I'm dealing 10 damage to Vader right now. And just how that changes the game, and the ability of different players to predict that to different extents, is really what separated the top tables from the bottom.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, if there were something that I would encourage you to play with, because you can do whatever you want, I mean, really get invasive, is to, what would the world look like where there was some sort of resource cost for playing cards? Where it's not just luck of the draw, but playing a 3 actually cost you more in game than playing a 1.
Right. And we've had that
a victory point for every cost of the card. 3 points to play assassinate.
Then you'd have to either increase the objective points available or make it like a 20 point to win. But we've discussed how that could work, but honestly, that's beyond the scope of what we want to do. That's something like you have paid game designers go make IA version 2 and let them figure it out.
That happens a lot.
And we do want to give
stuff I think that, so to go back to like the first question that didn't get answered on the thing because it couldn't, that's a real answer for, why did Imperial Assault run its course? Because a lot of the time, from a pure design standpoint, we wound up saying those words a lot. That's for second edition, right? There is no second edition, right? But just from a design standpoint, right? That's not something we can put in now. That's not this game. It should be, but it isn't, and it can't be. And so we started kind of running out of stuff, because the stuff we would want to do necessitated a different game. And so that's sort of an interesting full circle, I guess, because those are words that we said a lot. Oh, that's for second edition.
We have kind of come down on the side of we don't want to change the core mechanics, because we want to make the game still accessible for people that want to come back to Imperial Assault, and we want to make sure that, this is the same game I played before, it's just there's new cards added, and we're kind of waiting for somebody else to officially make a second edition with those kind of changes.
I think I'm hoping the semi-announced new version of Descent has a skirmish mode, and then they could address all these issues.
That will be interesting, because that's something that we really decided early on, because obviously because of the prevalence of C-3PO, Gideon Argus, and Zillow Technique, just every list had one of those 3 cards. There was no way you were running anything else. And so we did consider for a long time, okay, do we change that? And eventually I think what we decided on is, no, let's keep the core of the game as is, but let's just stick to it without making it too oppressive. So just accept the fact that every Imperial Assault will have Zillow, and then design the figures around the fact that Zillow is in the game. Accept that focus is a thing.
Yep.
And exactly.
And one of the ways we've been trying to fight that is, instead of trying to power creep over those figures, we just accept that those are the baseline, and then we say, okay, we're going to give people more powerful options, but only if they run certain figures instead. So like Yoda is very powerful, but you only get the full power level from him if you have Force users.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same
Rebel
for
Force
Wookiees.
users specifically. You
Exactly,
can't
so you
bring
can't-
Maul in. Can't bring in.
Sure.
Oh, that would be.
But that's how we've figured out we can diversify the metagame without increasing the power level above what was set, is just to like put out more different archetypes out there that people can explore and play with that match the power level of the
Yeah,
base.
and I think that this really has humbled us as well, because I think as players it's quite easy to go, oh, what were the
hard.
designers thinking? This was so, anyone could have seen it a mile away. And then we've spent weeks and weeks and weeks designing cards we release to the public, and we go, oh, crap.
Yep.
And
We still get it
more
wrong.
and more lately, as we've been looking into how to change FFG designs, we've run into, oh, this is the exact what if we tried it this way? Oh, that doesn't work for X, Y, and Z reasons. Oh, this is the exact conversation that was had at FFG when they were designing this card.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just personally, I tend to design by like just shotgunning 10 ideas and then figuring out which 9 of them suck, and then whatever's left standing, that's the card.
Yep.
It's about like that. You make 10 of them and 9 of them are terrible.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it goes.
The
Yes.
amount of cards in our cutting room or our cutting board floor is
Crazy.
I mean, there are a lot of ICP cards out there, but it's a fraction of the ideas
Yeah.
we've had. A lot of them very, very stupid. A lot of them very stupid.
Somebody will post a card, say, "Oh, that's stupid," but this one ability you have here, that's cool. Let's put this into this other design.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Actually, we didn't delete. I don't know how much we deleted. How much we really. I mean, we did a lot of like, because you have to make so much stuff. You really like. I mean, the thought of purely cutting something and having to write something new is a very oppressive thought. Even something as small as a command card, it's like, God, I've written so many. But so I think we definitely, I at least went a lot more the editing route. The worst was when a mission wasn't working. When you knew that the correct answer was this mission is bad and needs to not exist. That was the absolute worst feeling. But
At least you weren't working in app games.
oh God.
You'll find out
Yeah.
after like 4 weeks that your app mission sucks, and you're like, well, too bad.
Yeah. Also, I don't. Are you guys writing flavor text? Probably not much.
We are, yeah. From
You
time to
are?
time. Well, where we can fit it, yeah, on skirmish upgrades and stuff.
Because that is also.
yeah.
the-
Skirmish upgrades.
I don't know how many times I wrote. There are only so many variations of the phrase, and then stormtroopers start shooting you. But I've written each one of them 10 times a piece.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
started
on
to
the-
feel very dead inside.
We
Yeah.
really try to put the flavor text in like the names of the cards and the abilities, which I thought you guys did always really good with. Like actually, if you guys want to look at another one, HK47,
I'll pull that up.
Thank you.
he doesn't have flavor text, but he has these ability names that are in brackets that are
Nice.
evocative of the video game, where he would bracket the beginning of every statement, right, with like query or statement.
Sure.
And so we ended up putting that on the card, really inspired by what you guys did, especially with the later ability names and like command card names that were often like movie quotes. I thought you guys did a really good job of getting the flavor all over the card instead of just in a little italics at the bottom.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that was oh God, yeah, flavor of the card is way more important than flavor text.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, flavor text being good is really rare.
Yes.
It's incredibly rare. Todd and I actually, a few months ago, we played one of the app campaigns together for funsies. There's a lot of really bad writing
Pro tip: don't let your devs write your story.
And I've seen it and I would run like mini campaigns for my friends or something, and I'd be reading this like, do I have to say these words out loud? Words that I'm sure I wrote, and it's like, oh my God, this is embarrassing that this exists.
Oh, from the going back a lot of topics, the Hoth finale of as the DM reading that, oh, they're begging with Dengar to have mercy. It's like, what? Who's stuff like that? It's like, yeah, this makes sense from the thing, from the game mechanic of if you did these cool things earlier in the campaign, then Dengar joins your team. But then you just get the flavor text of, oh, one of your people yells, Dengar, remember all those fun times we had together? Join us.
Yep.
Yeah, it very much just had to. It had to do a job a lot of the time. It was, but yes, much better when. I mean, it's your basic fundamental writing strategy, right? Show, don't tell, and flavor text is almost exclusively telling. Yep. And making design that feels flavorful is showing. So.
That's great. I never thought of that like that, but
you have the incorrect abbreviation of accuracy that is correct for how anyone who is normal would abbreviate accuracy, but is not correct for how Imperial Assault abbreviates accuracy.
That's right.
ACC dot comma, right?
Correct. It is the correct abbreviation is AC dot.
Oh yeah.
AC.com.
Sorry, I only bring that up because we had several conversations in the office about how silly that abbreviation is, and how much more the way you're doing it makes sense. But
yeah, you wouldn't believe how often it doesn't fit on the card wins over any design discussion.
Yes,
we've had that discussion, and our template for the new cards has more space in the text box, which has been very nice.
Mm-hmm.
We still try to limit it. We have a little program that creates a mock-up with an actual traditional frame, and we try to limit the text to fit in that mock-up because otherwise it gets pretty crazy. But I think we noticed Palpatine and Jabba have had templating that was they don't specify which figure they attack with.
Whether it's a friendly or hostile.
And we were guessing because if you add that, it adds another line to their text that goes halfway up their image box. I'm guessing that's what happened.
Almost certainly.
Or we forgot. I'm Palpatine, or not Palpatine, but one of the Imperial class cards from Palpatine is apparently really screwed up. And I think I wrote that card message where you can attack with a rebel figure, but there's this really unclear rules interaction of if you're attacking with someone, does that mean you get to use all their abilities? Which means you could use a rebel's once per game deplete card because you have control. And I just want to go out there and be like, I didn't mean it. Don't do that. That's the worst idea. Who would allow such a thing to happen? I'm a monster.
I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jake.
I was gonna say, I think that's we've gone through all the stuff in our extensive list that we weren't sure we were going to get through all of. So.
Yeah. We really appreciate you guys talking to us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Definitely.
It's fun to get to dive back in. It's fun to get to dive back in and kind of relive and think about some of those things and decisions we made. And it's fun to see it getting... I mean, the one... Again, I haven't really dived into it too deeply just because, it was my profession, and it is now not my hobby. You know what I mean, right? So just the amount of time it takes. I know the amount of time it takes to understand this stuff, and I know that I don't have that time. And so I have not given these cards the extensive understanding that you obviously have. But what I would say is, and I mean this as a very, very much a compliment, the formatting, language, and structure of the cards by far exceeded my expectations for what I saw incoming interns do, what I would see general community people do, and what I see general community people do with just any game out there making homebrew content. So, right, the attention to detail on how things are structured, in my opinion, speaks to attention to detail on how things will work in the game. And so noticing those things and noticing very, very little that I would have rejected from publishing on its face is incredibly uncommon, and and speaks to a very, very good understanding of what you're doing, and it makes me excited and happy that people are doing that to that level with this game.
Aw.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because I do remember one of the big design philosophies. I'm sorry, I forget who originally said it, but it's one of the original Imperial Assault designers who I remember, again, my good friend Alistair, he asked, how do you design a card? And the answer was, create the most interesting ability possible using at least as few words as possible. And we've just tried to stick with that as much as we can.
Sometimes you end up with cards like Dr. Afro where, like, to get the design intent, you have to use 5 lines of text. But in game design, less is more. And we've been trying to stick to that as much as possible.
You just feel so much cooler too when you execute something that is only 2 lines of text and you do it well. You feel better as a player. You feel like you're playing the game, even if it's playing a game and design. It's all such a lie that we tell ourselves, right? Like we are just existing in this lie of our own cleverness, and it like we talk all the time about how, like, players are going to make wrong choices. You cannot give players wrong choices because they will make them. You have to trick players into thinking that they are making good choices. So you can't be overly prescriptive because then they feel stupid, like they're just watching the game happen. But you can't be overly permissive because then they will inevitably make bad choices and feel bad and feel stupid. So you have to trick people into thinking that they are smart and making the right choices while guiding their hand away from doing something entirely stupid. And as simple as it is, deciding what to do with 2 lines of text, deciding versus initiating 5 lines of text, you feel like you did that, and when you have to do 5 lines of text, you feel like the game did it. And it's wild how much of an impact that has on the subconscious of someone playing your game.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right, well, I suppose just to wrap up the IACP discussion a little bit then, do either of you have any favorite IACP cards?
I've only started barely looking at them.
Yeah, I
need to quickly hold on.
That's fair.
Again, I can say on a big, I wouldn't know what the favorite would be until I had read it a lot more deeply.
No, that's entirely fair.
No, definitely.
Do you guys have any favorite original cards that you designed for the original game, or for not IACP? Maul.
I wouldn't have expected this, but I found myself searching for Nexu. Like, Nexu was always such an iconic, like, weirdo that, like, never really found a home. I was like, I want this to be good.
Nexu ended up being too good.
We did try to make them better, and it turned out that they were just so close to the edge of being good. They're where Sentry Droids were, where they're just below the line of being good, but you give them, we put their health up by 1, and that was too good.
we did that and gave them +1 damage on the attack. That was too much. The combination of the two.
The problem with Nexu is that when they're good enough, they're not fun.
Right.
It's one of those things that if it's balanced, it's not fun. Evasive, or what is that? Is evasive?
Cunning.
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 Adding a block for every evade.
Worst ability in the world. Just so awful.
Rich get richer.
Yeah, exactly.
Evades are a real big, like, big red don't have fun sign as well.
We've learned that. it took us a couple seasons, but we learned, oh, evades are not fun. They stop you from doing all the cool things on your figure that you brought them to do. We should probably not put so many evades on things.
Exactly. That's what we realized, that arguably one black die and an automatic evade is borderline better than 2 black dice.
Yeah.
Just
Something
just
like that.
the power and consistency of that.
Especially because of the vulnerability to Pierce, right? And how prevalent Pierce is as a search ability.
Yeah,
I don't know. I would say Maul is probably my favorite. What is it? Jawas are silly.
I love Jawas.
Jawa swarms are a real list in the competitive meta.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. God, this is old school, but I used to have a ton of fun stomping on my own E-webs with ATSTs.
Get them to move places. That's always fun.
The like
that's amazing.
micro optimization puzzle you could do in the very early of the game before we knew what was good, with Imperial officers ordering ATSTs off activation to step on things to bump them an additional space. Like, that was a fun little puzzle that had nothing to do with my opponent.
That was my favorite part of playing. That was my favorite part of playing double Bantha lists, was being able to have that set up where Gideon moves them 2, and all of a sudden 4 of my figures are getting 2 movement points apiece.
Yeah.
And it just was, and so many people watched that and they were just like, oh my goodness, how are you doing this? This isn't how the rules work. Judge, yeah, he's doing it right.
Yeah. You feel like you get to cheat, and you feel like you have to be clever to do it, and like that's just a good intersection for high level play.
Yeah. I enjoyed Bantha Riders. I like a lot of the big fluffy stuff that isn't quite good enough.
So Paul and Todd, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It's I just kind of took a shot in the dark, reaching out to Todd. It's turned into such good conversation. So yeah, we really appreciate you guys taking time out of your Saturday morning to talk to us.
Absolutely.
And we appreciate all the work you guys did.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm glad you were able to parse through it.
I mean, it's amazing what you were able to build with only 2 people at a time. Frankly, I don't understand how it's possible. I'm pretty sure it defies many laws of physics, but it's amazing what you guys built.
Yeah, we have 7 people on this project, and we still barely get things out the door on time. So that's really impressive for everything you guys were able to do.
Especially with only focusing on Skirmish, which by and large requires a lot less planning and preparation than an entire campaign.
Yes.
One of the big things that the board game industry is getting more and more requiring of expertise. Thank goodness. But for a long time, the main asset that was necessary for board games was time. We were able to do this because we got paid to do it for 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
Oh
God, I wish I could find somebody to pay me to do this for 40 hours a week. Like I like what I do. I'd rather be doing this.
Yeah, and then you do it for 40 hours a week for 2.5 years, and you're like, oh my God. Fair. Like writing command cards, but everything in its place, of course.
Exactly.
But I mean, and I do think that Todd and I got to be pretty darn good at what we do, and I know a handful of other people in the industry who aren't just using time and are getting good at what they do. But yeah, I mean, there is no substitute for being willing to take the time, and so and it's clear that you guys are taking that, and it's it's exciting to see.
In particular, it's really nice to see the like really well thought out iterative framework that you guys have developed.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so all right, so this is enough of a Minnesota goodbye. I know the majority of people here are Minnesotans, but we don't have to take all of our traditions to everyone else. So thank you both for coming, and I think we'll conclude it there.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, it's been fun.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.